Okay, hello everybody. So welcome back. I'm Andre Mirzayan, the 73rd Youth Governor, and we are so happy to have you attend our second Fall Speaker Series event. This month, we're thrilled to be joined by a good friend of YNG, California Secretary of State Alex Padilla. In his position, Secretary Padilla is focused on modernizing the office, increasing voter registration and participation, and strengthening voting rights. He has sponsored legislation in 2015 to establish vote centers, expand early voting, and implement same-day conditional voter registration through the Voters' Choice Act. In 2018, he launched the California Motor Voter Program, which automatically registers eligible Californians to vote when they obtain or renew their state ID or driver's license. The program registered 1 million new voters in its first year alone. He oversaw the state's historic general election in 2018, where 64.5% of registered voters cast a ballot. This was the highest turnout for a gubernatorial election since 1982. And in February of 2020, California reached a record of more than 20.6 million registered voters. Previously, Secretary Padilla served 2 terms in the San Fernando Valley in the California State Senate and represented the East San Fernando Valley in the LA City Council. He grew up in the San Fernando Valley, attended local public schools, and graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a degree in mechanical engineering. Secretary Padilla, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me. I know there's a lot of folks on the line. Wish we can convene in person because I always love feeding off the energy of the YMCA Youth Government program. So appreciate being able to join you virtually.
Of course, that's great to hear. So as I'm sure we're all aware, we are 47 days away from the upcoming presidential election. And as our state's chief elections officer, can you share how California is preparing to help tens of millions of people vote during this unique time in our state and nation?
Right, and more than 21 million voters to be precise. The voter registration in California keeps going up, especially amongst young people, and I know that's in large part to the effort of a lot of the people in this event. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me spend a few minutes just kind of going over some of the specifics about the November election. First, talking to you as very, very, very likely voters, right? Because I know those of you that are 18 or will turn 18 before the general election or on general election day are eligible to vote, but also share a few things with you as, frankly, organizers in your community. We're going to lean on you to help get the word out on some of the options for people to vote and vote safely this November. And then there's going to be a little bit of an ask at the end for those of you who may be willing to do a little bit above and beyond. But, I know this is a little bit speaking to the choir when I say that, the right to vote is important. Registering to vote and voting in every election is important, and election results matter. That's why you're so engaged in youth in government. So I get to skip all that. I don't have to convince you anymore. I get to just jump to the what you need to know for November. When 2020 started, I think back to January, there seemed to be a lot of excitement everywhere that I went, every meeting, every event, because it's a big presidential election year. And regardless of your political leanings, we know that we've all been through a lot these last 4 years. And whether people were excited to continue the direction of our nation, of our state, or our community, or people want to see a change in the direction of our state, our nation, or our community. Elections is how we do it. And 2020 is going to provide a very important opportunity to make our voices heard. If the March primary is any indicator, I'd say that the state of our democracy is strong. Record registration going into the March primary, record turnout in the March primary, and then about a week later, COVID really started hitting. And you saw declarations of emergency and stay-at-home orders, and it kind of rocked our world, to be honest. And in the aftermath of that, we started huddling, not just my office, but representatives from the governor's office, the legislature, county elections officials, and a lot of voting rights advocates, asking ourselves the question, how do we approach November so that we keep the election as accessible as it needs to be, as secure as it needs to be, obviously, but also safe, in the era of COVID. And it turns out that a lot of the policies that we've been championing in California to increase participation make even more sense during this pandemic. Things like registering to vote, right? We see the ongoing success of automatic registration and pre-registration through DMV, online voter registration and pre-registration, right? There's no safer, more physical distancing, better way to do it than to do it online. And we continue to see registration continue to grow. So again, a new record high, more than 21 million voters on the rolls. And now what does it mean for voting this November? So here's what we need everybody to know. Because of COVID, California decided to send every active registered voter a ballot in the mail in advance of the November election. Right, vote by mail has been popular for many, many years in California, more every election cycle, and so why not just continue to build on that? So every active registered voter will get their ballot in the mail in early October. First week of October is when the ballots will be delivered. And we give voters options for how to return their ballot. Yes, you can mail it back. Was on a call with the U.S. Postmaster General as early as a late morning today, ensuring that the Postal Service will be able to return ballots on a timely basis. And California is so committed to voter participation, return postage is prepaid. You don't even need to find stamps or go buy stamps anymore. But of course, if you want to, prefer to, voters can return their ballots to any ballot drop box in their county, convenient to them, in the weeks leading up to the election. Or you can do what some people do and get you receive your ballot in the mail, fill it out at your leisure, and then you walk it in, drop it off in person at any in-person voting location. Because this is not an all vote by mail only election. That's going to be a strong recommendation. Anybody who can and is willing to vote by mail, I think that's going to be the safest way to go. But for people who need an in-person option, whether it's out of an accessibility concern, language assistance, maybe to replace your ballot if you made a mistake or lost the first one, or to participate in same-day registration, we're working with counties to ensure that every county has sufficient in-person voting options both on and before Election Day. So in most counties, you're actually going to be able to vote over the course of 4 days in person if you choose to, starting on Saturday, October 31st, Sunday, Monday, and then of course Tuesday, November 3rd. We should think of Tuesday, November 3rd, not as election day, but simply the last day to vote. And so that's kind of the big overview of how we're going to be voting now, and a couple of additional tools, and then my ask. Because we're going to be relying on vote by mail so significantly, we are expanding a new tool statewide. If you go to vote.ca.gov, maybe somebody can help me put that in the chat box. That's where all of our voting and elections tools are in one location. Register to vote, pre-registration, verifying your registration status, updating your registration, but also an option called Where's My Ballot? If you click on that, you can sign up to get alerts by either email, text message, or phone call if you'd like, on the status of your ballot as it's being delivered, both on its way to the voter and on its way back to the county. So great, I think, for transparency and peace of mind. Imagine getting a confirmation message that your ballot was received, right? You don't have to wonder, you know. And the day your ballot was counted, you don't have to wonder, you're gonna know. And so I say that because there's been some questions about vote by mail recently and questions about the Postal Service. So we send them out in plenty of time. Return ballots by mail have to be postmarked on or before Election Day. Normally we give it 3 extra days after the election to arrive and still be counted. We're extending that deadline to 17 days just in case there's delays in the Postal Service. So I think all around, we're as ready as we can possibly be for this November election. But here's the last thing, and this is where you come in. As I mentioned, we're working hard with every county to ensure there's as many in-person voting locations available for voters who need it. Some counties are, pretty much where they need to be. Other places are still searching for more venues, and we're helping them find them. We could have all the in-person voting locations we could ask for. They're not helpful to us if we don't have enough poll workers. Some of you may have heard this already. For folks who have voted in the past, we've relied on a lot of senior citizens and retirees to help volunteer on Election Day. They're not going to be available as much this November because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we're recruiting a new generation of poll workers to help us out. If you're interested, again, you can go to vote.ca.gov, scroll down to poll worker and sign up. We'll send your name and contact information to your county, and they can reach out to you to make sure that we get you the proper training, the proper PPE, because we're going to make sure all the physical distancing and protective measures are incorporated into the in-person voting experience, and we'll get you paid. Every county offers stipends for people who work as poll workers. Every county is a little bit different, but it's usually about $100, give or take, a little bit more if you're bilingual. So if that sounds good to you, if you or anybody you know is interested, please tell them to go to vote.ca.gov, click on poll worker, and sign up. And I know that working together, we're going to make sure that our democracy stays strong, stays resilient, despite the threats against it right now from a misinformation standpoint, foreign interference. We got that covered. The biggest thing that we need to avoid doing is falling into the misbelief that our vote doesn't matter, and that it's not going to make a difference, because it does. Voting is the oxygen of our democracy. I know you all know that. That's why you're so committed to the Youth in Government program. And thank you in advance for helping us out, get the word out on what people need to know as voters. For those of you who may sign up to work as poll workers, thank you in advance. And again, just so great to be with you all again.
Thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. I had no idea about the program where you can actually track your ballot and see it being confirmed as it's counted. That's really cool. So we're going to get into the questions from delegates now. If you have any questions, add them to the chat box. I'll be happy to ask the Secretary of State for you. But I have a
before we take the first one, if I can just add one last thing. I know many of you are familiar with the pre-registration opportunity. If you're not 18 yet, you can pre-register to vote if you're 16 or 17 at the same register to vote function. Same thing with being a poll worker. You don't have to be 18 to work as a poll worker. We have a very strong student poll worker program. So if you're 16 or 17, with the permission of your parents and with the permission of your school, you can sign up to be a poll worker and still be paid. Like I said, all poll workers earn those stipends. So if you're not quite 18, don't worry, we still need your help.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, I know a friend of mine who's actually the son of the chief of staff for Eric Garcetti. He's volunteering to be a poll worker too, and you get paid. He's doing it for 3 days. I think it comes out to around $400 in LA County, and you can also get community service hours for it. So you can get both, which is really nice. But if you have any questions for the assembly member, send them into the chat box and I'll ask them for you. And make sure to share your high school or delegation in your question as well. But before we get into that, I have a couple of questions that I prepared beforehand just as we get these questions coming in. So earlier this year, the National YMCA organization set up a Zoom webinar with the youth governors from various states and Paul Pate, who was the then president of the National Association of Secretary of States. This was something that was really interesting to me because I knew there was a National Governors Association where the governors of various states can come together and talk about different issues. I had no idea that a similar program existed for the Secretary of State. So could you go into a little bit just what do you guys do in these meetings? What do you talk about? And with so many different states with different political, social, ethnic makeups, how do you guys come together to agree on different policies, agree on how you're going to approach voting by mail right now? How do those meetings go? And what's it like to interact with the Secretaries of State from other states?
Sure. And actually just had a session earlier today. So everything you said is true, except for the how do we come together and come to agreement on all this stuff? Because we don't always do. In the United States Constitution, the responsibility of administering elections is formally delegated to states. And so every state can choose for themselves how to administer the elections. On the big picture stuff, there's broad consensus, but there's a lot of, in the details, right? Devil's in the details, some differences from state to state. So the National Association of Secretaries of State is actually the oldest of its type of organization. Governors, attorney generals, treasurers, etc. Secretaries of States were the first to establish an organization where people from across party lines can come together and exchange ideas, exchange experiences and best practices, and come up with new and better ways of doing things. The job of a Secretary of State involves more than just elections. So a lot of times there is easier consensus to be found in maintaining historical archives or handling business filings and transactions, those sorts of things. When it comes to elections, I mean, again, on the broad strokes, yes, you need to be 18 years or older and a citizen to vote. That we maintain that. How do we promote voter registration and participation? You know, we can exchange those ideas. Sadly, you know, once in a while we get to a little bit of a heated debate on how hard we should be working to make it easier for people to register, to stay registered, and to cast their ballot. So, you know, we try to do it professionally and maturely as possible. You know, I try to lead by example. Frankly, California is really pushing the envelope, you know, running up the score on voter registration because of all the options to register. You know, I mentioned pre-registration, online registration, automatic registration. Some states have online, some states have automatic, some states have both, but California has it all. Similarly with vote by mail, I guess that's a hot topic these days. In some states, you know, there's a few states where it's not even offered. In some states where it's offered, but it's very limited, right? You literally need a doctor's note, or you have to be older than 65, or have to show, you know, demonstrate why you're going to be out of state and can't vote in person. In California, you don't need an excuse. You know, so many states, more states are going to the no excuse vote by mail option. And then you have the official rules, like by when your ballot has to be returned. In some states you have vote by mail, but the ballot has to be in hand when the polls close on election night. California, as long as it's postmarked by election day, it can arrive later and still be counted, right? So you have these little nuances, and we try to convince each other as to what's the better format.
Okay, and that goes pretty well into our first question from an actual delegate. This is from, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but Divya Ganesan, a 12th grade MLC delegate, who says, what do you see as the biggest barrier to voting today? What is the largest barrier facing youth voting today? And you can sort of interpret this as how you want in terms of California or nationally for the US.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. You know, what's the biggest barrier? At least in California, we're trying to take all the excuses off the table, right? You can pre-register to vote even before you turn 18. When you turn 18, if you haven't done it by then, you know, you can do it online, or as you're applying for or renewing your driver's license or your state ID. And even if you missed all those opportunities and missed what used to be the voter registration deadline, we have same-day registration in California. So you can show up at any in-person voting location and still register all the way up through election day and still cast your ballot, right? That's how easy we try to make it. And so the real obstacles I think that remain, given everything that we do in California, is really sort of the misperception that maybe your vote doesn't matter, or a lot of the election disinformation that we keep hearing about and reading about. You know, the term election disinformation really skyrocketed in the 2016 presidential election, just 4 years ago. Seems like a long time ago, but 4 years ago, you know, you guys have all heard the story: foreign interference in our elections, agents of the Russian government creating confusion and chaos, exploiting social media, get people to think something other than what the true information is about how we register and how we vote. And so that is what causes me the most grief, to be honest, countering all the disinformation that's out there, because it's no longer just agents of the Russian government. There's other foreign adversaries involved with it. There's a lot of Americans that intentionally or unintentionally are sharing bad, erroneous information. So we got to constantly correct the record and do our best to get to voters first with official, reliable, accurate information. So if you have any questions about voting and the elections, contact your county elections office or the Secretary of State. Go to vote.ca.gov.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of breaking down these barriers and excuses for people to not vote, that goes into the next question from Matthew Rivera, a 12th grader also from the Model Legislature and Court Program, who says that since elections are the most significant events in American politics and history, do you think that the election day should be a holiday, which would allow students to volunteer to be poll workers, to do community service for their communities without jeopardizing school attendance, and offering them a sense of contribution to the service of American democracy and service to their state and country?
So yes, yes, yes. You know, and I've been hearing it for years. You know, it should be a holiday, and I couldn't agree more. But again, there would have to be a legislative proposal. You know, is it a federal holiday? Is it a state holiday? Some people resist that because of impact to the economy, those sorts of things. And that's a worthwhile debate to have. And so we've kind of bypassed that in California with what we call the Voters' Choice Act. I kind of laid out how the November election is going to run, but in recent years, more and more counties have been going to a model that's pretty similar, where every voter gets their ballot in the mail automatically. You have your multiple options for how to return your ballot by, through the mail, drop boxes, or in person. But the other part of the Voters' Choice Act that's really neat, and half the states covered by this, by the way, is we've replaced older polling places with what we call vote centers. With a little bit of technology, we can empower voters to vote anywhere in the county convenient to them, right? Maybe it's easier, more convenient to vote closer to school than to where you live. For parents, maybe it's easier to vote closer to work than where you live. You have that option under the Voters' Choice Act, and it's not just on election day, it's for the entire period of in-person voting, which has historically has been 11 days, 4 days for this November because of COVID, but hopefully we get back to normal and it's 11 days. So then you pick which day works best for you. Is it Tuesday, election day? Is it the week before? Is it over the weekend? Where is it convenient to you? And that's if you didn't vote by mail to begin with. So more options, the better.
Mm-hmm. So this is a pretty specific question from Rehan Javid, a 7th grade Model United Nations delegate. And his question is, my city of Torrance and city of Industry are the only 2 cities in Los Angeles that will not put county voting boxes in the city because of costs. Is there a cost-effective solution to this problem?
We haven't given up. We know the city of Industry has a smaller population because it's much more industrial. But even with that, we're trying to make sure that there's the drop box option there. Torrance is still a little bit of a head scratcher. And we're trying to work around that. But the good news is the Dropbox is not the only option. Again, we make it easy to mail it back from home if that's something that you're comfortable with, handing it back to your letter carrier. You don't even need stamps. Like I said, return postage is prepaid. And with the added transparency and accountability of tracking your ballot through the Postal Service to make sure that it got back on time and it is indeed counted. And then again, the fail-safe of walking it in person when in-person voting opens up. So multiple options for how to return the ballot. We want to make sure drop boxes are available for the folks who need it. So we're not going to give up on Industry in Torrance.
That's great to hear. So another question from Gianna Vacareza, a 10th grade model legislature and court delegate. She asks, do you believe that the voting age should be lowered? And if so, why? I'd assume also put in how low should you go? Do you think 16, 17? What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, so I've been supportive of recent legislation to allow 17-year-olds to vote. There's been those measures through the legislature. One of the measures that's been more successful, has got more momentum, and is actually on the ballot this November, is Proposition 18. If approved, what Proposition 18 would do is anybody who's eligible to vote in the general election, right? If you're going to be 18 by November, then you should be able to vote in the primary, regardless of what month your birthday is. And so I think that's going to add momentum to the cause of letting younger people vote. The other thing that's been adding momentum is the success of our pre-registration program, right? Because you can say, oh, young people are interested and are engaged, but if you don't have a way to measure it, some people may not believe you. And so since we launched the pre-registration program in California, more than 600,000 young people have pre-registered to vote. So that's like a very quantifiable metric of the interest is there, the engagement is there, the commitment is there. Here's another bit of good news. Way more than half of those 600,000 have turned 18 since they pre-registered, and they're amped up, ready to vote this November. So the more we increase the pre-registration and then registration rates of 18-year-olds and more folks come out to vote, I think the stronger the case is that young people are ready to take this responsibility seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And Youth in Government, California's Youth in Government program has actually endorsed Proposition 18. I'm pretty sure it's also a proposition that the previous Youth Governor, Aiden Blaine, was working on. So that's great to hear that that you guys are supporting it as well. But
Yeah.
next, I want to have a question from Maddie Cowgill, a 10th grade model legislature and court delegate, who asks, what are you doing to mitigate the risk of foreign intervention and interference in our elections? So are there any specific policies or anything that the Secretary of State's office has put in place to try and limit this as much as possible?
So for sure, and then we'll do this one, and then maybe one more question before I got to jump to my next event. It's a busy time right now, as you know. So again, we take threats to the integrity of our elections very seriously. I talked about a lot of the disinformation that concerns me, and so if you go to vote.ca.gov, scroll down to the Office of Election Cybersecurity, you'll learn a lot of the measures that we have in place, including not just human eyeballs, but we have some of the technology that exists for monitoring social media platforms for erroneous and misleading information. We've developed protocols with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, to bring erroneous posts and tweets to their attention for review. And they're usually pretty quick about taking misleading stuff down because it compromises voting rights, right? If it works to suppress the vote or discourage voting, we want to make sure to address that. So that's one of the mechanisms. And that's separate and apart from what we do to keep the infrastructure of our elections safe. So the good news is in California, we have the highest security standards that voting systems have to meet to be able to be used by any county in the state. Think of all the machines that you may use to mark a ballot or to cast your ballot or even to tabulate the votes. They have to be tested, certified. We require paper ballots. So California requires paper ballots and a paper audit trail. And all that equipment that I talked about, we prohibit from being connected to the internet. So we make it impossible to systematically hack or rig an election. And even after all that, every county has to conduct an audit of the ballots after every election to ensure both the accuracy and the integrity of the results. So a lot of measures we put into maintaining election integrity.
Yeah, that sort of goes into another question from Kathy Saliba, who's on the CalY board. And this is a really quick question before we get into the last one, so you can go on time. But she asks, how long do you anticipate it will take to count all the California ballots? This is something that's come up a lot because a lot of people don't think that we're going to know who the next president is going to be for maybe a month after the election because there's going to be so many mail-in ballots that are going to be counted. So how long do you estimate it'll take for California to count all of the ballots in the upcoming election?
You guys are smart. Great question. So twofold. I'll talk California and then I'll talk the national picture. So in California, for better and for worse, we have this reputation of why does it take so long to finish counting ballots? I think it's for great reasons. Number one, the number of voters that we have in California, right? A lot more voters here than the population of any other state except for Texas and Florida. So it's going to take us longer just by sheer volume, but also because of all the measures that we have in place to both protect the integrity of the election, right? I'll give you one example. Vote by mail ballots, when they come in, the very first thing county officials do is check the signature on the return envelope from the voter against the signature on file as part of their voter registration, as part of the identification of the voter and protections against double voting, right? So you don't want to bypass a step like that, but it is time consuming and it takes work. You know, same day registration, we got to process the registration first before we count the ballot. It takes a little bit of work on the back end, but it's the steps that we'll take to ensure that your ballot gets counted, things of that nature, plus the auditing of the ballots before we certify results. You know, you put all that together. In California, we have a decent idea on election night of how most contests are going to turn out. But for close contests and for final numbers, it takes a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. We've always been known for that. Difference is we're going to see this dynamic play out in so many other states for the first time in a presidential contest because of the big expansion of vote by mail in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio and Arizona and others. And so there's a likelihood that come election night, if the news outlets are responsible, in the races that's close, they're going to say it's too close to call and we can't determine a winner. If that happens and Wednesday comes and Thursday comes and it remains too close to call, that's not the time to panic. That's the time to be patient. Understand that it's ballot processing that's underway. And once the numbers are announced, we'd rather get it right than get it fast. So we'll be done in plenty of time. in California, counties have 4 weeks to finish processing and auditing ballots. So closer to Thanksgiving time for final numbers. But I think we'll have a strong sense well before then. Plenty of time before the Electoral College in December. That's a whole nother conversation. And plenty of time before the Congress reconvenes in January. So just got to practice a little bit of patience on election night, unless it's a landslide.
Yeah. Well, lastly, we have two questions that are pretty similar. So first is from Henry Fix, who's also on the Youth and Government Board alongside me and two other youth delegates. And his question is, how is the California government planning on combating national poll worker shortages in light of COVID risks? And also from Tara Saeed, who's also on the Cal Y board, asking, what is something that passionate young people can do to support California during this election?
Yeah, great. Yeah, that'd be the one big ask, poll worker. We talked about that earlier. So for Californians, go to vote.ca.gov, click on poll worker and sign up. If you have friends or family in other states that are willing to volunteer, send them to powerthepolls.org, powerthepolls.org. And it's a similar platform. You plug in your name and contact information, they'll route it to your state and local officials, and somebody will be in touch.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Secretary. Before I let you go, are there any last thoughts that you'd want to share with us?
No, just thank you so much. Again, you guys are great because I don't have to convince you. You know how important this is. That's why you're so committed to the program. So thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. And I hope I provided some helpful information. Help me by spreading the word and doing your part. So, and continue to stay safe. Wear those masks, everybody.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll have the opportunity to speak to participants of the Youth and Government program when we have the opportunity to meet back in Sacramento once again.
Can't wait.
When that will be, who knows, but hopefully it's somewhat soon. So before we end the session, I want to thank everyone who's with us today. Please make sure to sign up for our next Speaker Series event on October 15th, where we'll talk to the University of California Board of Regents Vice Chair and former YMG alumni, Cecilia Estelano, about how COVID is changing California's education system. And if you're in high school, you can sign up for our Model Legislature and Court Program's fall session, Activating Your Political Voice, by visiting calymca.org. So once again, thank you so much for coming on. All right. Thank you, everybody.